Hello, everybody, and welcome to this BrainWaves webinar. My name is Tracy. I'm from BrainWaves, and today we're here to talk about learning to thrive in Key Stage 3, teaching the BrainWaves wellbeing lessons. So before we start, I thought it would be a good idea to outline what BrainWaves is and what we do. BrainWaves is a mental health and wellbeing initiative for young people led by the University of Oxford in partnership with the Day. As part of this initiative, we are developing one of the largest ever studies of young people's mental health. We hope to get 50,000 young people involved in the study, whereby they complete an annual mental health questionnaire. And here's where schools can get involved. By becoming a BrainWaves research school, your students can take part in this study and help us achieve our goal, mainly improving the quality of scientific knowledge and what we know about adolescent mental health in order to develop evidence-based and age-appropriate interventions to help young people manage their mental health challenges. And as part of this work to support young people, we have also developed a curriculum of evidence-based wellbeing lessons, which are freely available to schools, and that's what we're here to talk about today. But please, if you do have any further questions about brainwaves or how you can get involved in the research, then please do pop a message in the chat. So my first task today then is to introduce you to our speakers. If they would like to come on camera, if they're already there, great. So if you've attended a Brainwaves webinar before, you'll be familiar with Julian Turner. Julian is Director of Education here at Brainwaves. He is also a director of The Day, who I mentioned previously, an online newspaper which turns the news into lessons. And if that wasn't enough to fill his time, Julian is also a director at Camden Learning, the School Improvement Partnership in Camden, and he was previously Chair of Governors at the LeSwap Sixth Form Consortium. Hi, Julian.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Great to see you all here.
Can everybody see Julian okay? I'll just check that. Yeah, perfect. Great. Thanks, Julian. Joining us today, we are also very pleased to welcome Natalie Rodden. Natalie is a learning strategist with 20 years experience in education, including 3 years teaching in inner London secondary schools. Natalie has worked with organisations like The Day, the BBC, Lego, Bloomberg and Sky to develop learning programmes that draw on positive psychology and human behaviour, that make important topics accessible and enjoyable, and that engage students emotionally and cognitively. I love this fact about Natalie. She is guided by her belief that joyful learning creates deeper and more lasting impact. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's brilliant to have you here. And I'm so pleased today to be able to welcome Louisa Anderson to our panel. Louisa is Head of Citizenship and PSHE at Altrincham Girls Grammar School. Sorry, Louisa. And they are one of nearly 60 schools who have already signed up to become a Brainwaves research school and take part in our research. Louisa recently completed a master's in leadership of mental health in schools, following her experience of being a teacher in and around Manchester for 20 years. As the Brainwaves lead in her school, Louisa is responsible for coordinating student involvement in the Brainwaves research and also has been instrumental in integrating the Brainwaves lessons into the PSHE curriculum at their school. Hi, Louisa.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Thanks very much.
Thank you again for joining us. Now, as always, as we are talking today, you are very welcome to join in the chat throughout the webinar. We will be taking a few questions at the end, so if you want to submit a question, there's a Q&A button where you can type in your question there, and we can hopefully address any question towards the end of the webinar. So we're going to start off today with a short poll, if that's okay, if we can try and get that launched. We thought it might be a good idea to find out how many of you have taught a Brainwaves lesson so far. So you should see that's just popped up on your screen. It's very straightforward. Yes, no, not sure, if you're not quite sure if you've seen one of these lessons yet. And if you can just tick your response, that would be great. Okay, I can see most people have answered. Thank you. So if we can end that poll and share it, we'll see that almost a quarter of you have taught a Brainwaves lesson so far, which is amazing. Be great to get your feedback. But I'm so pleased that there are actually, quite a number of you who who haven't yet had the pleasure. So we'll be looking to tell you more as we go through the webinar today. So as you can see from this first slide, if we want to move on a little bit, we have now got over 24 lessons available at Key Stages 3, 4 and 5. We've been developing this program for about 18 months. We've still got some work to do, but there's a really lovely number of lessons available now, particularly at Key Stage 3. Just to reiterate as well that these lessons are freely available on our website. All you have to do is register for an account and you'll be able to access all the lessons and the accompanying teaching support. If we can just click through, we'll just quickly highlight for you the lessons that are available. I'm not going to read them all out loud. Hopefully you can see the breadth of what we've covered there. And we are going to go into these in a little bit more depth, but this is just to give you an idea of what the sort of topics are about. And when we were starting to teach, write the lessons originally, we knew we knew that teachers could be anxious about teaching these sort of lessons. And so we try to address the fact of this anxiety by coming up with support. On the next slide, just to reiterate, to help teachers take what can be a subject they're not really very comfortable with. So we've made sure that the lessons aren't very technical. The teacher and the students sort of discover the science in them together as a journey. We find that the Oxford validation of the lessons helps give teachers confidence that the lessons can be trusted. There are teacher notes, detailed teacher notes available. There are research guides available. We provide a one-page guide behind the strategy in each lesson. So there's lots of resources there, blogs and webinars as well, like this one, that can help teachers get very, very quickly up to speed with what's actually going on in the lesson. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking now for a little while and hand over to our panelists. So Julian, what would you be able to kick us off by telling us a little bit more about the ethos and the rationale behind the curriculum overall and how we develop the lessons?
Sure, thanks, Tracy. Yeah, so I suppose the starting point is to say what we're not doing. What we quite early on decided against was using the lessons to describe particular mental health conditions, even though, we understand that there are many young people who are interested in finding out more about particular conditions, and we know that teachers get asked about them as well. But we decided that based on advice from the experts in the Department of Psychiatry, that it would be better to take a more positive focus. So we adopted a non-medicalized approach based on the principles of positive psychology, and we decided instead to give young people the tools that would enable us to have an impact on what we hope will be the whole population. So our goal is, rather than just deal with people who are showing symptoms of difficult mental health conditions, is rather to shift the whole curve of well-being a little bit towards the positive. And if we do that, and we're successful in doing that, then that will also mean that there's a bit more resource available for people who really need it. So, and that was the philosophy. And above all, one of the key things, and this is, I'm really pleased to say, has been borne out in the first data coming from the cohort study, is that there is a really good correlation, positive correlation, between young people's sense of agency, with this idea that they have a part to play, some way of participating in the decisions around their life. There's a real positive correlation between their sense of agency and their well-being. So above all, if there's one thing we want to do in these lessons, it's to give young people the sense that well-being is not something that just happens to them. It's something they have a part to play in.
Absolutely. And is there a particular approach that each lesson takes? What sort of, how is it structured?
Yeah, so they're following on from that, therefore, the lessons are not very teach heavy. So they're not full of information, but they are science based. So what we do is we try to, in every lesson, we include a piece of science or a piece of data to act as a starting point, a way into the topic. The lessons are all based on good sound evidence that can be backed up. So as you mentioned earlier, those research guides that we produce go alongside the lessons help. If you're interested as a teacher to understand more about the science behind the lesson, you can go into it and look at that. They're supposed to be fun. I mean, it's supposed to be interesting and engaging, and actually our experience is they are, that the young people really care about this stuff, and so they do want to participate and talk about it. And above all, we want the young people to go away from the lesson with at least one practical strategy that they can adopt that will help them support their well-being or manage their worry or whatever the particular topic is. So we hope they're empowering. Basically, that's the kind of the pedagogy of it. Is we want to create active lessons that young people are engaged in and give them something practical.
Brilliant. Thank you, Julian. Now, Louisa, I know you've started using these lessons in your school a while back. Can you just explain how you chose to integrate the lessons into your curriculum?
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. We had initially we started with the sixth form resources. I did that initially with my form as a sixth form, once I'd come across the resources. And I was really impressed by the research-based sort of student-centered approach in sixth form. And then, of course, when the new lessons started appearing for Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, I was really keen to get them in the curriculum. So started by piloting a couple of the lessons in Year 9. And then this kind of perfectly, for me, coincided with me sort of reaching the end of my first year in a new school, where I was kind of champing at the bit to kind of update and redesign the curriculum. And so what I decided to do was I knew that I wanted a Year 7 curriculum, at least to start with. I was going to start with 1 year at a time. I needed to have a Year 7 curriculum that had a kind of bedrock of preventative wellbeing education, and that had always been my goal. So knowing what I had available to me with the BrainWaves lessons, it enabled me to do that. So I was able to sort of build a Year 7 program that was heavily permeated, but not exclusively, but heavily permeated by the BrainWaves lessons. So what I found was that the beauty of them as a sort of standalone resource, each one is a standalone resource, which meant that it was possible to sort of slot them in also in other year groups where I wasn't able to just completely redesign, but I could slot them in where I felt it was appropriate and still make sure that other year groups were getting that information, at least in some part. And every lesson, as you said before, comes with a set of teacher notes and handouts. So that makes it perfect for me as head of PSHE to be able to put them into the curriculum and know that teachers have access to information to enable them to deliver the lessons well. So with our Year 7 curriculum, I'll use that as an example because that's where it's most, so I suppose where it's most well formed at the moment. So we go straight in Year 7 with the science of well-being. And I find that that works really, really well because it introduces those threshold concepts really early on. So, for example, like I can influence my own happiness and the shape of my future brain. And knowing that in that really early stage is so important because then when we introduce, and of course we introduce the PERMA framework really early on as well in that lesson. So that then means that when I go on to do my other lessons, not necessarily BrainWaves ones at this point because they weren't quite ready at that point, I do lessons on transition and resilience and anxiety and sleep. There are now BrainWaves lessons that I'm going to go back and change those with. And in those lessons, you can frequently revisit the key concepts of PERMA when we're talking about things like support strategies and support networks, really. We can keep coming back to the concepts that they learned in the beginning. In a similar way, then when we started doing a unit on relationships. As you said, I'm head of PSHE, so it's not just about well-being. There's all sorts of things that we want to get into that curriculum. And when we look at relationships, again, I can still make really good use of the BrainWaves material with, for example, the BrainWaves lesson on conflict and repair. So I use that to kick off the relationships unit, which then offers you brilliant metaphors for dealing with conflict. Like there's a mouse that deals with passivity, and the lion is aggressive, and they're just great. And so the year sevens really engage with that. They have tools, like Julian said before, tools that they can then use to go away and actually try out on their arguments at home or with their siblings. It gives a clear basis then for me, from a curriculum point of view, to then deliver lessons on things like bullying, discrimination, microaggressions, with that bedrock of knowing how is best to deal with other people and how to get the best out of a situation. And the impact of when it doesn't go right. Then in a similar way used understanding your strengths to introduce a unit on careers. So reflecting on the character strengths in that unit, in that lesson, meant that then moving on to sort of thinking about nurturing and living those strengths is a really good foundation for then understanding future ambitions and reflecting on skills and strengths and what careers a person might be well suited to, and what activities they can do to help them nurture those things. So
yeah, amazing. It's brilliant to see the range of how it fits into your PSHE curriculum in so many different ways, actually. I mean, that's amazing. Sorry, did I interrupt you? Did you have more to say there?
There is more. Is there time for me to say?
Yeah, please.
Am I
Yeah,
out of
go
time?
ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I was keen to say is that when you introduce that lesson, those lessons on sort of science of well-being and my changing brain, you're introducing that concept of neuroplasticity. You might not be using those words, but you're introducing that concept really early on. And so it naturally follows then and enables you to have a sequenced curriculum, which for me is important. And it meant that when we came back to look at things like addiction, I can come back to the work we did on neuroplasticity and the importance of the things we do that shape our future brain. So we've just done a really impactful lesson in year 7 on smartphone addiction, for example, which has fed into some of the work they did earlier on, and made it so much easier for them to understand why this is important, and to value the impact of their behaviour and habits on their brain. And then, of course, in year 8, we can move on to things like vaping in a similar vein, and then psychoactive substances and alcohol in year 9. So again, we can sequence it in an age-appropriate way, but using the same concepts over again. So they're really firmly embedded.
Great. Julian, that was something we really wanted to try and do with the spiral curriculum. Do you want to just delve into that? And actually, Julian, we haven't maybe explained for those who aren't particularly familiar with it about what PERMA, we're talking about this PERMA framework, an acronym, but we haven't really explained to anybody who might not know what the PERMA framework means.
Sure. I'm just going to pop this slide up briefly. So but PERMA is an acronym describing the 5 core pillars of positive psychology. And if you look at on the left-hand column, the last 5 elements of that starts with positive emotions, and then underneath that engagement, and then underneath that relationships, meaning, and accomplishments. Those are all part of the framework that was developed by the positive psychology school in the early 2000s. So Seligman and others were key to that. And so we've used that, and we've made those 5 of the pillars that our lessons are built around as well. But we've added 2 others. So the first one we added was we've called thinking about mental health. And that's because what we realized quite early on is actually part of the challenge for young people is navigating the incredible quantity of information and, sadly, misinformation and sometimes disinformation about mental health, and particularly, conditions around eating disorders, managing low mood and things like that. There's some really dangerous content out there. So one of the things we wanted to do was to really empower young people to think in a critical way about the information they receive and to understand what the value is of this, doing this kind of research. So that thinking about mental health strand is extremely important to us. And then secondly, there's also a piece about the physiology, which is not really part of the positive psychology remit, but we thought it was really important for young people to understand the changes that are taking place actually in their brain. And it's really amazing to understand the amount of development that takes place and what the nature of that development is, and how it affects things like their hormones, the importance of sleep, the importance of exercise. There's so much connection between physical well-being and physical change and their mental well-being. So those were the 7 themes. And the idea is that we sort of revisit those themes in age-appropriate ways at the 3 key stages: Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, and Key Stage 5. And you know, there's a little bit of sometimes there's a little bit of revision there, but mainly it is actually addressing new topics, but just from those same perspectives.
Brilliant, thank you. So Natalie, to bring you into the conversation, when I think about these lessons, as I say, their main aims are sort of to be empowering, to have lots of active learning in them, and to include practical strategies that students can, take away and try and integrate into their lives. Can you tell us how, as an author, you try to ensure that the lessons achieve these aims?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, so we didn't really have much of a clue about well-being, and definitely that we had some sense of agency or control over it. So it's something I'm still learning, and writing these lessons was really empowering for me as a grown-up and as a mom. So I wanted them to be really, really empowering. But sadly, the world that young people are growing up in now is even more fast-paced, even more overwhelming than the one we grew up in, and our brains are struggling to keep up. So these lessons really help young people see the social, emotional, psychological challenges they face are normal, but more importantly, that they can do something about them. So like everyone's been saying, they're full of practical tools, and it's not just about helping students cope with all of this, but showing them how to flourish. So 2 empowering lessons that stand out for me, and these have been mentioned. So I've just been beaming listening to Louisa and so hearing how she's using these lessons and how they're going down. But understanding your strengths for me is so empowering. At Key Stage 3, we know that students are starting to make these really big decisions about their future. And this lesson really helps them discover their signature strengths. So the things that really light them up and that they really bring them to life, that they enjoy, but also that gives them a language to talk about the things that they're good at, and recognizing things that they might not think are that important are actually really useful and really important for themselves, their self-advocacy and their self-belief. And then another really empowering one, I think, is social media and the dangers of perfection, which is one of our new lessons. So for me, this one's crucial because at Key Stage 3, students are going through transition, they're starting to fit in, and they're starting to use social media in a big way. But hopefully it's not so ingrained that they can't kind of set up these good habits. So this lesson explores why social media is so addictive for their brains, why we crave fitting in, how all these filtered images and these algorithms impact on our self-esteem. But it's not all doom and gloom. So there's loads of brilliant videos showing all the hilarious reality behind these kind of perfect images, and loads of strategies to help them really take control of their online lives rather than being controlled by these algorithms. So those are my 2 top tips for empowering.
Amazing. And the lessons themselves are full of activities, really, aren't they, for kids? There's very little sort of teacher-led content. It's all about getting them thinking and getting them to come to the conclusions about their well-being and things like that.
It's such a rich topic. We just had trouble honing down all of the ideas because there's literally so much you could do. But I mean, wellbeing lessons, they have to be engaging, don't they? Because they're so important. So, like you say, just because the topics were serious, we didn't want them to be heavy. We wanted them to feel fun and interactive and meaningful. So
Yeah.
in my other role with the day, I work with Lego on Build the Change, and that's all about using learning through play to teach about sustainability issues. So I think I use some of the same approaches as that. So making it joyful where possible, really social, actively engaging, and meaningful.
Mm.
So when we play, we learn naturally. So there's loads of group challenges, there's games, there's discussions, and loads of relatable examples to make sure students feel connected to the content without feeling exposed.
So two of the lessons that I think are going to be particularly well used, or I hope they will be well used, are managing worry and challenging negative thoughts. And this is probably the furthest we get at this point into the less preventative area, the more preventative area. Yeah, Natalie, the strategies included in those, I think I've had adults come up to me and said this has been really helpful as a way of thinking about how I'm managing things. So they are not that they're all obviously evidence-based strategies, but they're not particularly complex in their, in their delivery. So yeah, just to pick up on that, really, you were very instrumental in putting those lessons together.
Yeah, so just quickly, the managing worry, the students work together to problem solve realistic worries using a worry tree, which is brilliant. And they also try out practical mindfulness techniques together as a class, like 5-finger breathing, sensory grounding. So when they're feeling overwhelmed, they've got quick things that they can do to help them kind of come back into the present moment.
Mm.
The challenging negative thoughts. We've got loads of fun quizzes, and we use that as a way to kind of differentiate between fact and opinion and different unhelpful thinking styles. And we also get them practicing positive self-talk. So turning their inner critic into an inner friend, which I think is super useful.
Love that. Love that.
I was
Yeah,
going to
absolutely.
mention, Tracy, I actually had that last week. Is somebody I was talking to working in a different workplace, who had a colleague that was, struggling with negative self-talk. And I was explaining about the BrainWaves lesson around negative self-talk, and they had a look at it. It was really, the point is, all of this stuff, it's simple in a way, but it's deep. And so we all of us can benefit from being reminded of these things. It's not something you learn once, all right, that's done. You have to keep thinking about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Louisa, just to bring you back into the conversation, how successful do you think these lessons have been so far in achieving some of these aims, to be empowering for students? Are you getting any kind of feedback from your students in relation to that?
Definitely, yeah, and I'm waiting for my we measure well-being here as well with a well-being questionnaire, a termly well-being questionnaire. I'm waiting expectantly for the next set of data, because I'm very, very confident that it will show a huge improvement in our year sevens compared to last year's year seven, because of the work that we've been doing with them. I would say, yeah, I mean, an example of a positive strategy that really stood out to me was, I can't remember which lesson it was. It might have been the science of well-being in the early stages, but it was where it gets them to go away and come up with 3 good things that have happened to them, to get into the habit of thinking in that way, or talking with the people at home. And that I thought was just wonderful. It was a wonderful thing to set as a homework, and then to hear the feedback from the following week. The kinds of things they've been saying. I've had some feedback from my year sevens this week, knowing that I was speaking today and wanting to share some sort of honest feedback from them. And some of the things they've said have been really lovely. So for example, it's made me talk and share more things with my parents, which I just thought was wonderful. I have a sense of control over my happiness. My friendships have been better. I've done activities I really enjoy, like going on walks and drawing. I've started to feel it's okay to make mistakes. It might make you cry a little, Natalie. I feel like it's okay to make mistakes, and talking about it helps. I now have counselling, says this year 7 student who has actually gone away and actively thought, I really need to talk to somebody about this. And her family makes time for 3 good things at the end of every day. So I think that
That's fantastic feedback.
absolutely the engaging activities, the way that it is research based, as you said, the Oxford sort of, I suppose, gravitas that the lessons have, and it's just, yeah, it's wonderful. I think that the students have really benefited, and they were really keen to give me their feedback when I asked for it.
Fabulous. That's and obviously what we are keen to do as a research a project is to validate those that feedback as well. Just leading on from that, we have been working very closely on the evaluation of these lessons with the Department of Education at Oxford. And we've collected nearly 9,000 student evaluations on these lessons. So it's been quite rigorous in terms of the student and teacher feedback we've received as well. And the aim is that we genuinely, evaluate this feedback and look to improve and revise the lessons accordingly, based on what young people are telling us. So yeah, we've got an evaluation of the lessons so far since we published them at the start of early last year. 85% are finding the lessons interesting, 86% are saying they've learned something, and perhaps most importantly, 83% are saying they would try something new, a strategy, as a result of what they've learned in the lesson. So that's the evaluation we've had so far. Julian, do you want to tell us a little bit more about the specific research into the Key Stage 5 lessons? Because we did a specific piece of work about that right at the start, in terms of best practice for schools.
Yes, we did. So we took some of that data, and we also did some focus groups. One of our some of our colleagues at Oxford University Department of Education, and so on. It was very, very interesting. So some of the things that came out, some of the challenges actually that came out, were the difficulties of PSHE being seen as a negative or sort of boring or kind of not for me, and having to get over that. So the framing of the lessons was quite important actually, and understanding how they are placing the lessons in the context of enabling students to develop skills themselves. A second challenge was teachers' level of confidence in teaching around mental health topics, and worries about not wanting to stray into difficult areas or make mistakes. And so the support material that you mentioned right at the beginning, we've sort of beefed that up over the course of the lessons. We've put more in there, and I think that gets better. And I would, anyone on the call, please, as Tracy said at the beginning, please do give us your feedback. That is what this whole the whole project really depends on, that because it was set up in an iterative way, and I mean that in two forms. So the first thing is that the feedback really does get used, and we've used feedback in order to evolve the lesson. So the Key Stage 5 lessons are already on a second iteration, and the teacher feedback is incredibly helpful, just practically in how it runs. I mean, for example, I think some of our early lessons were too tight for time, and we had to manage that a little bit. But the other thing, the other way it's iterative, I'm just going to mention this very quickly, is that for the first time, it was always our dream that we'd have the lessons themselves would be informed by the research. And there's a nice example of that in one of the lessons in Key Stage 3 around the value of helping other people. And actually there is good data which are on the benefit of for your own well-being from helping other people. So I like that connection between the research aspect of BrainWaves and the educational aspects. And one final thing is that it's really helpful, we've learned, if schools have someone who kind of takes on the BrainWaves lessons as a little bit of a project of love, and sort of maybe helps other teachers to deliver them, or is a point of contact. We're really willing to offer support here in doing that, and it's useful to have a person to deal with in the school. So that's just, it doesn't require deep expertise in the teachers. The lessons are set up so they don't require that, but nearly always in the school there is someone who actually is very interested in this area, and if that person has got a particular interest in the lessons, it's helpful for all sides.
Fantastic. Okay, so what I'm just going to do now is very quickly ask Louisa, do you have any top tips or advice for somebody who might be ahead of PSHE or citizenship, thinking about integrating the lessons into their curriculum? What would you recommend to them?
I would say that I think it's because everybody's in a different position, aren't they? And everybody wants different things from the program. I noticed on the chat earlier, someone said that they wanted to use it as part of an after-school wellbeing club, which I think is fantastic, and they're perfect for that. But I think for me, I wanted a robust wellbeing curriculum, and so I would say my top tips would be, based on my experience, speak to just get on with it, do it, start teaching them, get some positive feedback, speak to your stakeholders. So for me, that was deputy, pastoral deputy, the person who organises the form time programme. And then once I had some positive feedback to give and some evidence, and once I'd bagged the lessons I wanted for my curriculum, I then was able to go to them and say, these are lessons that I'm not making use of here, not because I don't want to, but because I've got so many other things I have to squeeze in. Can we find a way of putting this into the form time programme? So we've now been able to develop a whole school programme where we use all of the lessons, just in lots of different ways.
Fantastic, amazing. That's so cool to hear. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
I don't know if there's anything else to say.
Okay.
Start with the science of well-being, I would say.
Ah.
That's the place to start, because I think that's where the penny starts to drop. So.
That is very much intended. The order of the lessons, there is no order basically, but we do heartily recommend you start with the science of well-being, just because it explains the PERMA framework, and it provides a basis for anything that comes from that point. Two other lessons that you might consider teaching towards the beginning is also My Changing Brain, just because that's so fundamental to what young people are going through at that age, and it's so empowering for them to realize that this is happening, and this is happening to everybody. It's not just them. And then the Understanding Your Strengths one as well is very foundational, in the sense that it really positions young people to set them up for what can make them happier in life, and what can really promote their well-being. So Natalie, I can see you nodding there. Did you have anything you wanted to add in there?
Yeah, so I think I was going to give some tips for using these in the classroom.
Yes. Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, so first of all, try and make it personal. You know your students best, so take time to explore the lessons before you deliver them, and think about which parts feel most relevant to your class. What issues have you noticed cropping up for your students? We've included suggested timings, but there might be something really important. And if you find that, give it chance, give it time to breathe, because I think your students will really thank you for it. Setting them up for success. So think really carefully about groupings and class dynamics. So we've designed the lessons so that they feel psychologically safe, but you know who works well together. So creating that space where students feel comfortable to have those penny drop moments where they realise their struggles are normal and their classmates going through the exact same thing is really, really important. And then finally, just, which is what Louisa was saying, encourage action. So the real challenge is getting students to use the strategies. Can you set it as homework? Could you get them journaling about them? Could you revisit them in future lessons and get them talking about them? So learning about wellbeing is one thing, but practicing it is what's going to really make the difference. So like we're talking about neuroplasticity, neurons that fire together, wire together. So the more we can actively engage them in these strategies, I think the greater the impact.
Amazing, thank you. So Julian, I can see in the chat that there is a question about the teenage brain. Now, this was one of the lessons we had a lot of fun developing, didn't we? What was one thing you learned about the teenage brain that you didn't know before, Julian? Was there anything? Because I learned so much.
Oh, I know so much. And also, I just like to say that my third child was 16 when we were developing that lesson. So I was thinking I really should have done this about 10 years ago, but that was my main thought. No, I think there's the whole thing about the the editing of the pathways was absolutely fascinating, and how that happens. And I would really, would really recommend that. There's a very good book that is referenced in the support material of that lesson as well, about the teenage brain. There's some, there's been a couple of very good recent books about it and what it means for teachers. There's a good book about the pedagogy, which we can put in the chat maybe.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea.
Yes, do you remember the one I'm thinking about?
It's called the teenage brain, teaching the teenage brain.
That's right. So that was the first thing, and so that was the question from Sana. And also Sana says, what are some evidence-based strategies that Key Stage 3 students can use to manage stress and improve their mental well-being? Well, I think we've got, seeing as I think we have, Natalie, was that one of your lessons?
Sorry, what was that? I was looking at the chat when you said it.
What are some evidence-based strategies that Key Stage 3 students can use to manage stress? Was that one of your lessons?
Yeah, so I think I did the managing worry and challenging negative thoughts.
Yeah.
So we talked about the kind of grounding techniques, the kind of bringing yourself back into the present moment. So that can be through, there's some sensory exercises. What are you seeing, hearing, feeling, sensing, and some kind of breathing techniques as well. But also, I guess, like telling the difference between unhelpful thoughts and helpful thoughts. Yeah, distracting yourself.
In summary, I suppose, Sana, well, obviously we would say, please do go and download the lesson. It's completely free. Just have to register your school. You can have a look at it and you'll see in there. But a lot of them are about trying to put your worries into context in some way, sort of getting them, being grounded, being able to get some sense of, is this, as you were just saying there, Natalie, is this a real worry, or is it something that is sort of just being slightly confused by other circumstances? And that's there's a lot there about sort of being very grounded and dealing with it. So that's what we would say.
Amazing. The one thing I learned about the teenage brain very quickly is about the prefrontal cortex being the least developed part of the brain, and that's the rational part that that makes you logical and that helps you think through problems and solutions. And you can clearly see that with young people. I'm speaking from experience here. How the amygdala within the internal part of the brain, when they're under stress, freaks out, and the prefrontal cortex just goes to, everything goes to by the wayside. And it's realizing that self-regulation in young people just isn't there in the way that it is with grown-ups, and almost as an adult, as a parent, or maybe even as a teacher, that appreciation of the structure of their brains, that it just isn't developed yet to have that logical informed response or reaction to a stressful situation. It was so helpful. So on that note, I'm going to suggest that, yeah, please do go and have a look at the lesson on my brain. It's absolutely fascinating. The John Coleman's book on the teacher and the teenage brain is also absolutely brilliant. And so I'm just going to see if there's any other comments that any of the panelists. Oh, Julian, there was just one brilliant quote, wasn't there, about the penny dropping at some point with a student. And I thought we might maybe finish off with that when they were doing do you remember? You're looking at me.
I do remember. No,
okay,
no.
Please, great. Off you go.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely seminal moment for me. We're working with, we have a young people's advisory group that we, every stage of the process, we kind of check in with them. And that included around the topics that we'd cover, around what was reasonable to share with other people, what wasn't reasonable to share, what their concerns were, and discussing these issues in class and so on. And during one of the breakout sessions of that, a young woman reflecting on the lesson that we'd just done, which I think might have been about, I think it might have actually been about the talking, having conversations about mental health lesson. But she said, before I did this, I didn't really think that I had any role in this. I thought that sort of mental health was something that you mental illness, something you had or you didn't have or whatever. But I think I can see that I can make a difference. And it was her saying that just made the whole thing feel worthwhile for me. It was a very moving moment, really, because it's just that realization that once you switch into on mode, that you're part of this, that first step is by far the biggest step. And I've seen that with people I'm close to personally as well. So that was the moment for me.
Amazing, thank you. Just seen a quick question from somebody saying, is there a Key Stage 4 lesson available for managing stress? And I have to admit that one is still going to come, but that is definitely on the agenda, and that we are hoping to get that out published at some point this year. So there is still more work coming, lessons coming from the BrainWaves team. So please do keep an eye out for those. But yeah, absolutely, we appreciate that. That is a really important topic for Key Stage 4 students in dealing with exam stress.
By the way, the only thing that keeps us from doing this is funding. We are BrainWaves, entirely voluntary. It's an entirely philanthropically funded project. So all of the work is produced as a result of donations from people. So that's why it's entirely free. And so any extraordinarily wealthy philanthropists that are on the call, please do get in touch, and we can have all the lessons.
We won't have to wait until we have funding.
Tracy, just going back to what you were saying about the stress lessons and not being ready yet, there is a Key Stage 5 lesson, if I remember rightly, a sixth form lesson.
There's a sixth form lesson. You're absolutely right. Yeah, thank you,
which
Louisa.
I know I've taken a few bits from and used with year 11 in the run up to their exams.
Louise, that's a really good point. And in fact, I should have mentioned is one of the other bits of feedback we got from that first piece of research was that many of the topics are things that, of course, can be discussed younger than that particular key stage. So in the Key Stage 5 lessons, they were the first ones we did. So we did do something about, there's a question in the chat about anxiety in exams, and we actually did do something about that, getting the Key Stage 5 students to reflect on their own experience, what they had learned themselves from their own experience of doing GCSEs. That was a really valuable lesson. But of course, actually that lesson could have been used much earlier as well, or a similar lesson could have been used much earlier. So you're absolutely right. They sort of, I think generally we've shifted topics downwards over time in age so that we introduce them earlier.
Right, we're going to wrap up the webinar now. We're just very quickly going to ask you the final question, and that really is basically, have we inspired you to try and use the lessons in the future? I realize this is a slightly loaded question, so please do feel free to say no if that is the case. We won't be too offended, but we do hope that you found this a useful session, and that we have managed to inspire you a little in some capacity. I want to say thank you to all our guests for joining us today, and thank you for coming along and sharing your insights, and mostly thank you to everybody for attending today. I hope these lessons can be a really valuable addition to your school's curriculum and for your young people. So thanks again, everybody. Lovely to see you all, and we look forward to seeing you at another webinar sometime soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.